here as a nation. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to commend this bill.
David Clark.
Mr. Speaker, Labor will support this bill because it makes some sensible small steps towards the fair collection of student loans, and we'll be supporting it to select committees so that we can examine some of the issues that we think need to be picked through more closely. Firstly, I just want to relate some comments to an issue raised by Mr. Young about the way in which indebtedness blocks opportunities for employment, and take issue perhaps with that generality, because the student loan collection system effectively works as a tax, and we know that the tax rate going up is going to mean that those students who are new out of their studies will have less resources at their disposal, and that goes to really simple things like whether it's buying appropriate clothing for the job, be it in the form of a suit and tie, as in this occupation, or some gear for a job that involves a bit more physical labour, and also, of course, the ability to photocopy curriculum vitaes or put gas in the tank to get to interviews. So it's not quite as simple, I think, as Mr. Young depicts it in that regard. The tertiary sector, as we know, is very important for social good in our society, and it is the critic and conscience of society. Those that study take on a responsibility, I believe, to contribute back to society, and that is part of why we as a country choose to contribute toward the costs of study through the student loan and allowance scheme. We believe it's the right thing to do, we believe it's the fair thing to do, and we expect our citizens to give back of their best to the future of this country, and I think that's a fair expectation. Fairness is a very important term for the Labor Party in this respect, and the words fairness appear often in the explanation for this material, in the publicity around the changes that are proposed, and I guess I want to see the changes that this government's looking at go a bit more broadly so that they actually do begin to address the issue of fairness in greater depth. I'd contend that this bill is in fact by and large tinkering. Because most of the tinkering is positive tinkering, that is why Labor will be supporting it to select committee. Nonetheless, it does nothing to address the big issues in the sector. We know that access is dropping. 25,000 people have lost eligibility for student support under this government. 25,000 people in a situation where unemployment has been rising. We know that there's nearly 50,000 more people unemployed under this government. We know that 50,000 people each year are leaving for Australia. We know that opportunities here are limited in a way that they shouldn't be if the government had more leadership. But we also know that it would be sensible in these times to make accessibility to tertiary studies a priority, and particularly for our younger folk. And we see here that this is becoming less and less the case under this government as the thresholds around student support have become more stringent. And that means that the wealthy, of course, can afford to study, but those who are from more modest backgrounds, of modest means, can no longer access courses in tertiary study to better themselves, to become future taxpayers and contributors in the way that they once could. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to restrain myself because I can hear my own echo. The sound system today is very, very loud, but it's keeping me quiet, so you'll be pleased to hear that. The other issues, of course, that are not being addressed through this legislation or elsewhere by this government include the issue of capital depth. You know, those other things that would help our economy grow. Pro-growth tax policy, research and development tax credits, which of course require not only the right incentives for business, but also strong graduates. And we need our best and brightest to be able to access our tertiary system, not just those who can afford it. We need to make sure our education system is accessible to everybody, and particularly to those who are high achievers, who could contribute more if they had access to our tertiary system. So we need to review the adequacy of our student support. There's no doubt about that. If we're going to demand fairness in repayment and fairness in contribution afterwards, and I think we should as a society, if we're going to demand that people give of their best to our country afterwards and repay their obligations, we have an obligation also to make sure that the system is fair to access. And that goes to the heart of the adequacy of student support. And if we look over time, we can see that as a percentage of the average wage, the student support under governments of all stripes has gone down over the years. This is something that does need to be addressed for the good of students everywhere and for the good of our country in the long term, because of course when our best and brightest do not study, they do not end up contributing perhaps as much as they might. Those who would wish to study but can't, who are deprived of the opportunity through affordability, cannot give of their best, and that costs us all. That costs them personally, that costs their families, that costs the wider community that they're a part of, but it also means that they fail to contribute the maximum that they could contribute to our gross domestic product, to our economy as a whole, and to the pot of tax that we all have the privilege in this Parliament of choosing to spend in the public good in terms of other education and health benefits. So it's short-sighted when one sees tertiary education as a cost only. We need to see tertiary education as an investment. I'm afraid this government seems to know the cost of everything and the value of nothing, Mr. Speaker, and that is a shame, particularly in this respect, where we know that the returns to a tertiary degree, for example, are amongst the best investments anybody can make in their own life. The returns are phenomenal. The student loan data set tells us that, to an education. So for those who have the abilities and the desire, we need to make sure that it is accessible. To the issue of fairness in collecting, which is directly addressed in this bill, Labor does support the changes that the government is proposing in terms of making it a fairer system. We support the principle, in principle, these changes, but we'd like to hear more advice from officials, and particularly from the Privacy Commissioner, as to the impact of Customs sharing the detailed and personal information with the IRD, because this is a privacy issue. And assuming that can all be done in an appropriate fashion, then we might be likely to support that. But if there are concerns raised, as there were indeed around the collection of data about a nominated person introduced in another piece of legislation that went through in the budget, then we would want to make sure that those concerns were covered off in an adequate way so that legislation was as good as it could be. We in Labor want to make sure that every borrower has to make sure that they pay back what they owe for the opportunity they have been given to study. And that principle of fairness should apply in terms of the bill's measure to expand the definition of income to include business profits and income from trusts. Labor is happy to see that matter being addressed. Those who receive income from a company, a trust, superannuation scheme or other source should be treated in the same way as those who earn the weekly wage. This is a small loophole that Labor is very happy to see closed. And broadening the definition of income will save, I understand, the Crown approximately $7 million over the next 5 years, according to the Treasury. We commend these measures to make sure that the system is fair and sustainable. We would encourage the government strongly to look at making sure that all New Zealanders can access tertiary education, not just those who are already privileged. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a long time now, the Green Party